All right, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this interview of the Living Better podcast with Dr. Jacques Dallaire. He's a performance specialist, CEO and president of his own company called Performance Prime, which aims at improving people's from all walk of life's performance in either a high-stress environment, race car drivers, military personnel, law enforcement, or just any athletes on the Olympic level. So we had a really interesting and great part 1 when we talked about the performance equation, which is a framework that Dr. Dallaire put together so that we can understand better how we sabotage our results. And the takeaway of this is that we spend too much time, or way too much time, focusing on the things that we can't control in any given situation, that ultimately we sabotage the things that we can because our focus is not in the right spot. So extending on this, I wanted to talk a bit more about what people can do to enhance the A part of the equation on a day-to-day basis when they get into either, a competition or a high performance setting when they have to achieve the best that they can deliver.
I think probably the key to understanding this framework's application in the performance world is the realization that the Holy Grail is our ability to control the deployment of our focus of attention so that it's directed to the right thing at the right time. Often I have people who say to me, okay, so if I understand what you're saying correctly, I just have to focus more. I just have to get my kids to focus more. And if they focus more, they'll do better, right?
Yeah.
And my response is, no, actually, that's not necessarily true. Because if the thing they're focused on is the wrong thing, how does focusing more help? It doesn't. It actually makes the problem worse.
You're just focusing more on the wrong thing.
On the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So the real key, if there is a key to success, is the ability to focus correctly on what matters in the moment that it does. So the first step is to understand what we're focused on, to become vigilant, to eavesdrop on the mind chatter going on inside of our own head, so that we can catch ourselves being incorrectly focused. Because the sooner we recognize the slippage in focus away from the correct thing towards the incorrect thing, the easier it is to redirect our focus to what matters in the moment. And if we focus on that, we can't focus on anything else. So we have to become better at eavesdropping on the mind chatter going on inside of our own head.
Yeah.
And the truth is, people are not good at controlling their focus of attention.
No, definitely not.
We go along like the squirrel in the road, swishing our head back and forth, trying to focus on everything, not realizing that by trying to focus on everything, we focus on nothing effectively.
Yeah.
So we have to police our focus of attention. We have to control it to direct it to the right thing at the right time. So the first thing we have to do is recognize that we're not correctly focused. I've used the analogy of a flashlight to describe this process of mental focus. Think of the beam of light as my beam of concentration. I can direct it to one spot, or I can swing it over and direct it to a different spot.
Yep.
I can focus on one thing, or I can focus on a different thing. I get to control the flashlight of my concentration. I can turn the head on that flashlight and narrow the beam to make it more like a spotlight, or I can twist the head on that flashlight and open it up to make it more like a floodlight. Because sometimes my focus of attention needs to be narrow, and at other times it needs to be broad.
Yeah.
So The ability to focus is not either one of those things. It's the ability to adjust my focus of attention based on the demands of the situation so that it is narrow when it needs to be narrow, but broad when it needs to be broad. And here's the problem. If I'm narrowly focused in a given situation when I should be broadly focused, am I focused?
You are, but on the wrong kind of focus.
Exactly. Yep. That's the key, Metsier.
Yeah.
You got it right. Because a lot of people say, well, no, you're not focused. And I say, no, I am focused. But I'm not correctly focused for that situation. Sometimes our focus of attention is internal. For all intents and purposes, we could have our eyes closed and we're trying to solve a problem or figure out something strategically. Mm-hmm. And at other times, we need to be externally focused so that we're paying attention to what is happening in front of us in this moment. This is the example of your shooting.
Yeah.
If you're internally focused, thinking about the next target, when you should be externally focused on the target you're shooting at now, you are focused, but your focus of attention is incorrect for the action you're about to execute, which is pulling the trigger on this particular target.
Yeah.
So we have these different dimensions: broad focus to narrow focus, internal focus to external focus. We also have an intensity component to our focus of attention. Sometimes when it's a critical moment, when you're stacked on a door and you're going through it.
Yeah. For a TAC team, for instance.
For a TAC team, for an example. The intensity of your focus is extremely high because the consequences are immediate and they're serious.
Yes.
But when you're walking down the hall, going into the shopping mall, thinking about the things you're there to buy, the intensity of your focus is substantially less.
Definitely.
There's a difference between being generally aware and vigilant and being hyper-focused, right?
Yeah.
So there's an intensity quality. There's also a duration quality to focus of attention. Sometimes our focus of attention needs to be sustained. At other times, it's really brief.
Yep.
The Indy 500 race lasts over 4 hours on the edge of control.
My God, 4 hours.
A golf swing in tournament play takes approximately 64 seconds on average. The duration from hours to a minute. And there's an inverse relationship that exists between intensity and duration.
Okay.
The more intense our focus of attention must be, the shorter is the period of time we can sustain it at that level of intensity without suffering brain fade or mental fatigue.
Yeah.
And that's why TAC teams, that's why air traffic controllers are on station, ready to go for a limited amount of time and then rotate it out, because you cannot stay intensely focused for a long period of time without suffering brain fade.
Definitely.
So the key is correct focus. And the skill set of focus is the ability to be broad or narrow, internal or external, intense or less so, sustained or brief, depending on the circumstances. It's our ability to shift our focus of attention based on the demands of the situation that truly is the holy grail of the performance equation. And this simple explanation on focus highlights the critical importance of being present. Because if you're not present and in the moment, how will you be able to judge what the right kind of focus is in that situation?
You won't.
You won't. And we do our best work when we're fully present and engaged with what we're doing. And the side benefit is, it is a place of calmness.
Yeah.
The absence of anxiety.
But how do you know what kind of focus is the right one? Because I would kind of think that if you're thinking a lot about what kind of focus you need to apply, then you can get confused in your own head and maybe not deliver the performance that you want to deliver.
You can't think about being in the zone and be in the zone at the same time.
Exactly.
You can't judge how you're doing and be connected to doing it at the same time. So experience and learning teaches us what the right cues are, what the right things are to focus on. That's what you do in your training as a TAC officer. That's what Special Forces guys do. That's what everybody does. Yeah. They learn to understand through repetition and practice what are the key things that are execution relevant and performance focused that I need to focus on in this kind of a situation. Let me practice doing that and controlling my thoughts to be this way. So the first step in understanding what to focus on is understanding what's important to my performance in the moment. What is relevant to execution? And then how do I control the deployment of my thoughts? And the ACT model process is a methodology that helps you to cultivate and sustain the mindset that optimizes that ability to control your focus to be on the right thing at the right time.
So it's a learning curve, but you're going to encounter probably a lot of failures before you have it right?
If it was simple, it would be magic.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, I guess to correct that, I should say if it was easy, it would be magic. Yeah. It is simple enough, but it's not easy. I'll give you that. But with repetition and practice, you improve the skill. When you started shooting competitively, you were not nearly as good as you are today.
Definitely. No.
How did you accomplish that? Through repetition and practice. Right? Shooting an awful lot of shots with controlled focus. Mm-hmm. The psychologists refer to this as creating learned patterned responses.
Okay.
You learn to pattern a response through practice.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's a skill set, but we first have to understand the problem to understand how to correct the problem. And in my experience, the vast majority of people do not understand the problem.
No, well, that's the thing, right? So that's why they come to you or they learn.
Step number one is understand. If you can understand the problem, you're halfway to the solution. Mm-hmm. That's the old saying, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
If you can understand the problem, you're halfway there to the solution. And that is fundamentally true, because if you don't know how you mentally sabotage yourself, mm-hmm. you might think that just focusing more will make you better.
Yep.
And you tell your kids, if you just focused more, you'd do better. And I got news for you. They are focused. The problem is they're not focused on the right thing.
Yeah.
And telling them to focus more doesn't actually help them. In some cases, it makes the problem worse.
You'll have to tell them what to focus on more. Right?
Exactly.
Then it would change the outcome.
Understand what it is they're focused on.
Yeah.
Let's use an example in school.
Sure.
Teacher calls on little Mathieu and says, Mathieu, what do you think about that? And Mathieu was thinking about the hockey game on the weekend. His mind was somewhere else. He wasn't paying attention to what the teacher was talking about because he wasn't interested. Or if he was really smart, he got it 10 minutes ago and now he was bored because the teacher keeps repeating herself. So his mind went out and had a coffee. But because he couldn't take the body with it, it sat in the chair. And then when the teacher says, Mathieu, what do you think about that? Mathieu's very eloquent response is, huh?
And it did happen, in fact, in high school and school.
And the teacher says, oh my God, Mathieu has ADD.
Yeah.
He can't focus. Mathieu, you're not focused. We need a parent-teacher conference, and we need to talk to your parents about the fact that you have ADD and you have trouble focusing. The truth of it is, Mathieu's pretty sharp. He understood what the teacher was saying 15 minutes ago. So his head was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And because he wasn't paying attention, he didn't plug into what was going on. Now, before I get all kinds of angry people writing to me and saying, there is such a thing as ADD, etc., I understand that. But I've had a lot of athletes and high-performance people visit with me and tell me that they've been diagnosed early in their career as having ADD or ADHD. And they were given meds. And the meds really screwed them up. So they stopped taking their meds, and they do well, generally speaking, but not always.
Okay.
And yet they come and visit with me, and day 2 of my comprehensive program is 10 hours long, and it involves testing. And these individuals who supposedly have trouble focusing go through 10 hours straight of testing, measuring concentration and timing and memory and decision-making, and they exceed the average for the high-performance database.
Oh.
How do you explain that if someone truly does have ADD?
Yeah,
How do you explain it?
Yeah.
Here's how I explain it. They actually don't have ADD. They've just never learned how to control their focus of attention. No one's ever taught them that.
Yeah.
But when they're interested in something,
They're right there.
they have no trouble focusing.
Yeah.
How come kids who have ADD can spend an hour on a video game with laser-like focus?
If they have ADD, yeah, exactly. So they don't. That must be just the fact that...
Now, that's not the explanation to all of it. And there are people who do have ADD and do require medication.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But in my experience over 49 years, a lot of kids, a lot of people that are diagnosed with ADD have simply never learned the principles that we just talked about of broad to narrow, internal to external, and the control over deployment of our focus of attention. Once they do, miraculously, their focus of attention improves. Well, of course, it's not a miracle. We just didn't understand the problem, and we never policed our focus of attention to direct it correctly.
No, definitely.
And therein lies the problem. We don't understand the problem clearly. And that's what my books and that's what my process of education is about, helping people to understand the problem more clearly.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it's not nearly as hard as people think to change the way we think once we know how to do it. So that's what my role is. I'm just a conduit of information. I'm an information pimp. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I help people to understand how they mentally sabotage themselves and how they can avoid that trap. And then they have to have the personal discipline to stick with it long enough to reprogram their unconscious mind. But it seems to work because I have thousands of high-performance people around the globe who have been using it very successfully.
Well, 49 years of experience. I think you've seen it all. Or do you still get surprised?
Not really. I mean, there are some instances that I have never crossed paths with before, but the fundamental problem is the same. Once you understand the framework, you will be surprised at how it explains the reasoning behind the problems that so many different people wrestle with. It's fundamentally at the heart of it.
Yeah.
Which is great news, because once you figure that out, you can apply it to your personal relationships, you can apply it to your work life, you can apply it to your hobbies, and do two things. Improve your ability to perform in the moment and reduce the level of anxiety that you feel. Both of those things, in my experience, and certainly what I believe, are valuable things.
Yeah, definitely. So having created that framework, do you apply it to your own self on a regular basis? And if so, have you been failing at it from time to time in your own personal life?
For sure, in the early days, as I was working through the process. Remember, I told you when I created the performance equation over 30 years ago was more of an intellectual thing.
Yeah.
And it took about 7 or 8 months for the light to actually go on in my brain as I was working with it.
Okay.
To get to the point where I could trust in it emotionally, fully trust in it. And now I do. I am absolutely, and now it is just the way I think. It's become part of my DNA.
So speaking about focus, what's your take on meditation? Because you've probably seen high caliber athletes, top performers meditate before a big event.
Yes.
So what's your take on meditation?
Well, I think it's a really useful thing. In the lead up to the big event, what is the most common emotion that high performance people engage?
Fear of failure.
Yes. The fear of failure is what creates this emotion. What is the emotion?
Anxiety?
Yes. So what does meditation do? It takes advantage of rule number 2. Rule number 2 says the conscious mind can only actively process one thought at a time. If I am focused on my breathing, the relaxation of my shoulders, then my upper arms, then my forearms, or whatever it is I am meditating on, the sound of the waves, a relaxing music, whatever. If I'm focusing my attention on that, what can I not be focusing on at the same moment in time? The thoughts that are leading me to worry about outcome, worry about failure, and create anxiety. I am clearing and cleaning the blackboard.
Yeah.
Then, when I come to the event, there is no noise, there's no clutter that I have to cut through to get to the kind of focus I need to be fully present and execution directed. So yes, meditation is useful because it is relaxing, because I create a sense of calm confidence in myself, and I clean the blackboard so when it comes time to get on to the job, I can fully focus on the job without the noise.
Yeah. So definitely enhancing part A of the equation, because then you're fully present because you uncluttered your mind prior to it.
It's all tied together, isn't it?
It is.
See how simple it is, really?
Yeah.
It is that simple. Is it easy? No. It takes the mental discipline to control our thoughts.
Yeah.
But people don't. Here's what happens. People don't control their conscious mind's thoughts. They allow their conscious mind's thoughts to be defined by or dictated by the circumstances around them. And that's why they tend to be good when things are going well, and they tend to suck when they're not.
Yeah.
Not because they have to, but because they allow their conscious mind's dominant thoughts to be defined by the circumstances and the situation around them. But that's not what champions do. Champions cultivate and sustain a mindset that optimizes their performance, especially in those challenging moments when things are not going well or when it's critically important to be successful.
And what would that mindset be, in your experience, that they cultivate?
Calm, confident, now focused, appropriately intense, smooth, deliberate, clairvoyant, predatory, etc.
So by cultivating those thoughts, they ultimately become those thoughts, right?
The conscious mind is the captain of the boat.
Yeah.
The unconscious mind salutes and takes us in that direction. And if you and I were in front of each other right now, I could prove that to you in a way you will never forget for the rest of your life.
How?
It's a little exercise. It involves a pendulum. I talk about it in the book.
Okay.
But it is about the interaction, the powerful link that exists between what we focus on, the state of mind we call worry,
Yeah.
the anxiety that state of mind produces, and its impact on performance. And what we need to understand is how the conscious mind and the conscious mind work together. If I can load my conscious mind with the right kinds of thoughts, my unconscious mind salutes and says, "Aye, aye, Captain, I shall take you there."
Mhm.
And that is the basis of the ACT model process.
But it makes sense.
Doesn't it though?
Again, very simple, but people have a hard time doing it, right?
We've just never thought of it this way.
No, exactly.
You're an accomplished shooter and an accomplished, you've had a very strong career in the military and now in the job that you do as a TAC officer. And yet you've never thought of it this way either. There's
Nope.
nothing I've told you didn't already know, but you didn't understand it this way. And the framework is helpful because it allows us to tie the pieces together and to understand how they fit together and what the ultimate impact is on performance and on anxiety.
So for the people listening, what would be your biggest step to decrease either anxiety or control it very quickly when it arises?
Recognize that you're digging. Rule number 1 says, if you want to climb out of a hole, the very first thing you have to do is stop digging.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that you're digging.
Yeah.
Be vigilant and eavesdrop on the mind chatter going on inside of your own head to catch yourself in the act of digging. Because the sooner you catch yourself digging, the shallower the hole is, and the easier it is to redirect your thoughts away from outcome which you cannot control, away from the things that you cannot control, to shift your focus to the things that you can control in this moment right now. And if your mind turns to those things and you engage yourself fully with that, your anxiety will necessarily diminish.
Yeah.
Because anxiety only happens when you allow your focus of attention to shift away from what you're doing to contemplate how you're doing and start to fear that you won't do it well enough.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
It makes total sense to me. And that's why I thought that this framework that I saw in your webinar was very interesting. And this is why I wanted our listeners to hear all about it, because it's mind changing. Something that people haven't been exposed to, or it's a thought process that we don't recognize, but we all do. So once we start recognizing it, we can ultimately change a bit of it.
At this point,
Yeah.
It is information.
Yeah.
And information has no power whatsoever until you transform that information into knowledge.
Yeah.
What's the difference between information and knowledge? The library is filled with information.
Yeah.
But until I apply it to my life, it has no value.
Yeah, you're right.
It lives as information.
Yeah.
But if I apply it to my life, I have transformed that information into knowledge. And now it has limitless power because it applies to every facet of my life.
Wow.
So can it be life-changing? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have my clients told me that the experience and the knowledge has been life-changing? Probably 95% plus.
Yeah.
Not just in the performance of their sport or their occupation, but in their personal life, in their personal relationships. Because these principles apply to every one of us in everything that we do. And once we understand how to control our thoughts, to think better, everything changes because our unconscious mind snaps to attention and salutes, and the boat goes in the direction the rudder pointed it.
That's amazing.
Simple
really
principle, but profoundly true, universally applicable, and indeed infallible, at least based on my almost 5 decades of work with many thousands of people.
And what
And
would be?
I think most people would listen to the logic of this and say, geez, that makes a lot of sense. I've never thought of it that way. And they're connecting the dots in their own life to say, this is how I shoot myself in the foot. This is how I do it. I never realized that this is how I do it, but this is exactly how I do it. Now I have a clue how not to.
Exactly. And
that's what this podcast is about, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what
the Better Living Podcast. How do I live better?
Yeah. What can I do to improve my life?
These fundamental principles. How do I improve my life?
Exactly.
Not just my performance, but my life.
Yeah. To become a better human being. But and
imagine if we could teach our kids this, if we could put this information onto a flash drive and plug it into their ear when they're toddlers, to imbue them with this understanding of this framework, how life could be so different for them, given the pressures of school and being accepted by peers and all the other things that people wrestle with.
Yeah, it's a lot to deal with for kids growing up, especially nowadays. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We had problems. We had challenges when we were, well, you're a heck of a lot younger than I am, but when we were kids,
we all did.
we all had problems. They were just different problems.
Yeah.
Now the reach people have through social media and through internet and all the rest, the ability to get into people's heads and mess them up is so much greater than it was.
Yeah.
When I and even you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have levels of depression and anxiety today that are unprecedented.
Because of that, right? Because of all the exposure to everything.
It contributes to it.
Yeah,
it's not just because of that.
No.
It contributes to it. And parents and bosses and teachers who think that by constantly telling people how important results are and how they need to focus on the results because the results are critically important.
Yeah.
What do? They actually listen to us and they focus on how they're doing at the expense of what they're doing. And because what they're focused on is something that they can't actually control, it drives up anxiety.
It's crazy. Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And it's not productive. You're actually dooming them.
Counterproductive.
You're dooming them to fail by putting so much pressure on the results when you should put so much pressure on the efforts and being in the moment and focus.
There you go. And that's why the title of my second book was Helping Kids Perform Mental Skills Every Parent, Teacher, and Coach Should Master.
Well, I know I'm going to get your books for sure. I want to read them all because this is very interesting to me. And doing this podcast ultimately is something that I'm taking for my own self to learn more and then sharing it with people so that they can get something out of it.
That's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to share as well. Whether people buy a book or not is not particularly important to me. I think there's a lot of value there, but some people are readers, some people are not.
Exactly.
But if you take these principles we've been talking about and you start to think in a manner that respects these principles, you will improve your performance and you will reduce the anxiety you have in your life.
Yeah.
If you simply control your focus to be on what matters in the moment and on the things that you can control.
And what's your biggest success story, or at least working with a client or something? Let's say we take a race car driver that he was always last. Applying those principles, he finished first, maybe 3 times in a row. I don't know. What's your biggest success story?
We had a bit of a chat off mic with this, and I'm not going to tell you that. but suffice it to say that I've had the chance to work with very successful people, 7-time world champions.
Wow.
World champions, the best in the world at what they do, 7 times, 3 times, 4 times world champions. And those people visited with me because they had moments in their career where they struggled and had difficulty bringing what they knew they were capable of to the party because they started sabotaging themselves and never figured out how. And the experience and the information that I shared that became knowledge for them was instrumental in them turning their careers around and having some of the most productive years in their careers towards the tail end of it. That has happened on numerous occasions, but I would never signal out a person for that. You just have to take my word that there are those people out there.
Oh, that's amazing. Anyways, we're going to be running out of time, so I want to let our listeners know that you have this part 2 of your webinar that's coming up on Monday, May 18th. May 18th
at noon Eastern Daylight Time in the U.S.
Okay. Yep.
And it is scheduled for an hour, and it's a question and answer webinar that follows on the heels of the May 11 webinar I did at the start of this week. If you're interested in seeing that webinar, it is on my YouTube channel, accessible through the Dr.Dallaire.net address that I gave in the first part of this interview. And you can click on that video and watch it. It's about an hour and 6 minutes long. The webinar is a Q&A webinar on Monday, the 18th. And people who have participated in that webinar or viewed it can go on through that same Linktree portal and click on the feedback form to give me some feedback and to ask a question. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling together the various questions, trying to group them around common themes. And even though I will not have the time to address specific questions necessarily, or certainly not everybody's questions, I'm going to create some feedback on representative questions that are common to what a lot of people have asked. And I think you'd find that very informative. So I encourage anybody who wants to. It's a free webinar. It is being done through the Microsoft Teams platform. And as I said, you can go to www.Dallaire.net and click on the link on Monday for that webinar, the link to May 11th's video, and the link to the feedback form. And if you're interested in my books, there's a link there. I think it's the 4th link down to check out the books.
Yeah, and they can go to your website, performanceprime.com.
Correct.
For anybody seeking either organizations or teams or law enforcement personnel, militaries, if you're interested in
leadership teams, sports teams, occupational groups.
They can reach out to you.
This stuff is relevant to everybody.
Yep. But they can reach out to you to have a more specific program tailored for the application of their day-to-day duties.
Yeah. And through the website, you can either through the performanceprime.net or performanceprime.com. Both are a little bit different. You can access me through the contact information and send me an email, and I will respond where I can.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast and taking your time during this COVID-19 crisis to sit down and share your knowledge with me and the world ultimately. So I really appreciate it, Dr. Dallaire. This has been very amazing, and I really enjoy our conversation, and the webinar was awesome. So I suggest people to check it out. It's an hour long, and I would have sat there for 5 hours if it would have kept going. So
my full day program is actually 8 hours long. So you can understand that the webinar, we were just scratching the surface.
Yes, definitely.
But there is useful information there, in particular in this COVID time where people are as anxious as I've ever seen them in society today.
Yeah. So guys, check it out. Dr. Dallaire, follow him, dig into the books if you can, and you're going to get some amazing knowledge that you can apply right now today. All right. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Mathieu.
It was my pleasure. And seriously, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Bye.
You're welcome.